Washington Journal continues.
Our next guest is Farhana Khera from Muslim Advocates. She serves as their president and executive director, joining us from San Francisco. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Khera, recently concerning the Portland attack, we saw not only what happened in that attack, but the president's response to it. Could you talk about that in context of what it might possibly mean for Muslims here in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to begin as context for your viewers, what we're referring to as the Portland attack was an attack just over a week ago on a commuter train in Portland, where basically Jeremy Christian threatened a young Muslim girl and her friend, was using racist epithets, and three brave men stepped forward to protect those two young girls. And in the process, two of them lost their lives, and the third was severely injured by the attack by the perpetrator. And so that attack on that Portland train is actually one of many attacks that we're concerned about at Muslim Advocates that have been taking place, in particular over the last year and a half or so, as anti-Muslim rhetoric has been escalating in this country, and unfortunately has also been perpetrated by the president himself during the campaign trail, and by other elected officials from time to time as well. And it's creating a very hostile and frankly a dangerous and toxic environment for American Muslims, where simply going about your life riding a train is now a dangerous act to be a Muslim in America. We
did see the president respond directly to this via tweet, and what he said was, the violent attacks in Portland on Friday are unacceptable. The victims were standing up to hate and intolerance. Our prayers are with them. Was that enough in your mind?
It was not, Pedro, and the reason is that response was actually from the President of the United States official account. It wasn't from the real Donald Trump Twitter account, which is, as we know, is the account that is the president's voice himself, and he has eagerly used his own Twitter account to condemn the attacks, for example, this weekend in London, but he's been absolutely quiet in terms of his own voice on Twitter or elsewhere condemning that Portland attack. And that's deeply disturbing, because we do have a serious domestic terrorism problem, and this president has refused to condemn it, and it's attacking not just Muslims, but the Jewish community. African Americans have been attacked and killed as well in recent months, and so this is a time for leadership from federal officials, including the President of the United States.
When we hear of the attacks that took place in London and Paris and other places, in particular, does that at least give you some concerns as far as those here in the United States, well away from those instances, but the concerns about how that reaction to those international events might affect folks at home?
Absolutely, and especially the very quick knee-jerk reaction that we saw from the president and the way he was responding to London before even all the facts were in, I think does cause us a great deal of concern. And if there's a mass attack in the United States, I think we're going to require leadership from our public officials, and that includes the president and senior federal officials, who will need to do the work of getting to the bottom of whoever's responsible for those attacks, but also doing the work of keeping the country united. When we're under threat as a country, it is not a time to further divide the American people. It's a time to bring us together.
This is Farhana Khera. She's with Muslim Advocates, joining us for this discussion. If you want to ask her questions, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, Independents, 202-748-8002. Ms. Khera, tell us about your organization and who backs it, not only with support but financially.
Okay, so Muslim Advocates was started 12 years ago by a group of American Muslim lawyers, and we basically came together because we were very concerned about the challenges facing our country and specifically the American Muslim community. And we believed that, we have something pretty special in our country, and that's the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which allows each of us to live freely and to be treated with equally, as well as with respect and dignity. And we understood that those rights are under attack, and that at the same time those rights are not self-executing, and that throughout American history it's taken generations of Americans to do the hard part of stepping forward and fighting to ensure that our nation is living up to its ideals. So we're focused on protecting freedom, justice, and equality for Americans of all faiths. And we are supported by many generous individuals across the country. We're supported entirely by private donations, and we've so appreciated the outpouring of support from a number of Americans in the last several months who would join us in this mission and care deeply about the future of our country.
Ms. Khera, even as all these events we've talked about are occurring, now we hear that the Supreme Court may be the one that ultimately decides the fate of the president's travel ban. Could you give us a sense of what from your perspective, the ban, even as it gives temporary stops to certain people coming in, give us your take on the ban and potentially what the Supreme Court might do with it?
Yeah, so the president has issued 2 executive orders attempting to make good on his campaign promise to essentially stop all Muslims from entering the United States, what he called a complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. His first executive order was stopped by the courts. It was a temporary hold put on that first one. His team at the Justice Department then went back to work, redrafted another executive order, and that executive order has also been stopped by at least 2 courts with nationwide halts, and those are the right decisions. These courts are finding that the executive orders are overbroad, they're overreaching, and most importantly, that they run contrary to our core values as a country and at the heart of our Constitution, which is that we don't discriminate based on one's faith. And government cannot treat one religion differently than another. And the vast majority of the courts have been finding that the executive order, this attempt to ban Muslims from entering the country, is unconstitutional and it's wrong. Last week, the government did file paperwork with the Supreme Court seeking the Supreme Court's review of the Fourth Circuit decision as well as the decision in the Hawaii case just a couple of months ago. That paperwork will be completed in the next week or so. And I believe sometime this month we're expecting to hear from the Supreme Court about whether they will take up this case at this time or whether they will take a pass and allow the case to continue to proceed at the lower court levels.
First call for you comes from Mary Ann in Pittsburgh this morning. She's calling on our Republican line. You're on with our guest, Farhana Khera of Muslim Advocates. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Hello. You were talking about the attack on the train in Oregon, and we have in our country it's called freedom of speech. We can say whatever we want. The two gentlemen that jumped in, they're the ones that first they attacked him physically. That's when he pulled out his knife. And as far as you saying hate speech, we don't have no such thing. That's a political term. We have free speech. I'd like to hear your answer.
So essentially, I think the caller has the facts wrong about what happened on the train. And let's be clear, yes, we do have First Amendment protects speech in our country, but there's a limit to that speech. And you cannot, yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't engage in racial epithets in the workplace. And you certainly cannot attack, harass, and even kill people based on your views. That is just not only against the laws of the United States, but I think against any sense of common decency in our country. So I think that's what is so critical here, and what we're really concerned about is where the speech is actually instigating people to engage in violent acts. And that's what we have seen time and time again. And let me just also mention, Pedro, earlier this week, a congressman from Louisiana, Clayton Higgins, posted a statement on his Facebook post basically calling for a holy war and calling for Muslims to be killed. So this is very clear. This is not just saying, hey, I'm concerned about this, that, or the other thing, or I disagree with certain religious tenets of the Islamic faith. This is explicitly calling for people of a particular faith to be killed.
Again, the lines will be on your screen. Also, Muslim Americans, if you want to give your thoughts this morning, 202-748-8003. We'll go next to Kay, calling on our line for Democrats, Alexandria, Virginia. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'd like to thank the lady you have on for the answer she gave to the previous caller. And this is a pardon. Like, it's very sad. The lady sounded very educated, but they still follow Trump. Whatever Trump does, they still would follow him. For her to misstate the fact is very, very appalling, and that's so scary. For America. And let's all remember what Trump said during the campaign. He said even if he shoots somebody on the street, in the middle of the street, his supporters will still vote for him. His supporters are those who go to the political rallies wearing American flag, saying they want their country back and all that stuff, and they cannot call the president out when he does something wrong. When the president does something wrong, you have to call him out no matter how much you support him. But that is America, and it's very sad for like an educated society. You hear people talk on C-SPAN every day. No matter how the facts are, they still support Donald Trump. If you really love this country, like you're saying, like you want your country back, this is the time for you to show your love for America, Donald Trump supporters.
Okay, Ms. Khera, go ahead.
Yeah, so I appreciate the caller's passion, and just to underscore what the caller just said, it is vitally important that our leaders, from elected officials at the state, local, federal levels, all the way up to the President of the United States, show leadership. Our country has a number of challenges, from economic to foreign policy, as was being discussed in the first part of this hour of the program. And this is a time for us to come together as Americans, not to be divisive. There are people really hurting in our country economically, and we need everyone as Americans coming together to figure out how we address those economic issues, how we ensure that everyone gets access to health care, to make sure that working families are able to put their kids through college. These are real serious issues, and this is a time to bring the American people together.
From Miami, Florida, John is next. Independent line. Go ahead.
Hi, after the horrific attacks in Portland, I think it's important that anybody who cares about, the rights of Muslims Americans to keep in mind when they're watching politicians on both sides of the aisle talk about, fighting hate and Islamophobia. It's very important that we recognize that, especially on the right, the same politicians that will be talking about how horrendous this is are the same ones, authorizing military strikes that are killing Muslims every day without any oversight from our government. It's the same people expanding the police state within this country to surveil its own citizens. So when we're looking at people talk about anti-hate, it's important to actually look at the policies behind them. It doesn't matter if you're like a snake like Steve Bannon or a snake like Reince Priebus. Either way, you're trying to engineer a state that is really going to oppress Muslim citizens no matter what.
Ms. Khera.
Yeah, the caller, I think, touches on a really important point, which is what are these law enforcement and surveillance powers that government entities are using from the local level to the federal level? And I think your caller makes an important point that it's important for each of us as Americans to be very vigilant about what those tools are that law enforcement is using, because our rights are at stake as well as our security. And we need to be sure that while government is doing its job to keep us all safe, that at the same time our rights are not being infringed upon.
Republican line from Kentucky. Chris, go ahead.
Ms. Farhana, you totally mischaracterized the president's travel ban in your opening statement, and you should apologize. We here in America, we see that all these senseless killing by Islam extremists are 100% preventable. You do not have to let these people in. There is no reason for these courts to act the way they do, and I think there will be repercussions for it.
So, caller, could you explain how she mischaracterized the ban?
She said all Muslims. She said all Muslims from everywhere, and there's 1 billion Muslims around the world, and in 6 countries do not comprise 1 billion Muslims.
Ms. Khera.
So the president's executive order seeks to ban Muslims, people from certain countries, and those countries are only Muslim majority countries. It's 7 countries that he has designated. The executive order very conspicuously omits other countries that have been safe havens for terrorists, as has been determined by the State Department, that happen to be predominantly Christian countries. And those countries include Colombia, the Philippines, Venezuela. And so here specifically, the countries that have been listed by the executive order are specifically only Muslim countries. Furthermore, the countries that have been listed represent countries where people have not perpetrated deadly attacks against Americans here in the United States. And in fact, the biggest terrorist attack against the United States, which was on 9/11, was perpetrated. 15 of those 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals, and Saudi Arabia is conspicuously not part of the executive order. So it's not even seeking to achieve the purported purpose that the president says. And I think more importantly, what it's really intended to do is to just stop Muslim immigration, because the 7 countries that are listed in the executive order happen to also represent the nationality of the vast majority of Muslim refugees who have entered the United States in the last year. And I think when you probe further and you look deeper, you see that that's really what's at the heart of this, which is it's an attempt by the president and his advisors and his team to really stop Muslim immigration to the United States.
Ms. Khera, Ed Rollins, who heads up the Great America PAC, a Trump supporter, he makes this argument about the travel ban this morning in the pages of USA Today. He says when Mr. Obama instituted the first of his 6 travel bans in 2011, he cited the same legal justification as his predecessors, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, Section 212F. Does that apply then in this case, where these countries that we saw under the Obama administration be highlighted are the same ones highlighted in this ban?
Yeah, that's comparing apples with oranges, unfortunately, Pedro. As I understand it, what happened under the Obama administration was that there was some greater scrutiny applied to nationals of certain countries, but people were not barred from entering simply because they were a national of that country. It just meant that if they did want to seek a visa to enter the United States, there was going to be some additional security reviews of those applicants. That's not what this executive order is attempting to do. This executive order is basically attempting to put an absolute bar on entry of people entering from those countries. And let me also make this point, because I think this is sometimes lost in the public discourse, and that is that if this executive order is allowed to be go into effect, it actually has an effect on American citizens here at home. There are people in the United States who have family members who engage in business dealings with people who are nationals of these countries. And also importantly, there's a segment of the American Muslim community, the Shia community, that relies on religious leaders for spiritual guidance and instruction. And many of those spiritual leaders are actually nationals of those countries, in particular Iran, Iraq, and Syria. That would be like suddenly telling Catholics, hey, your priests are not allowed to enter the United States. It would be a real hurdle to the ability of Catholic Americans to practice their faith, and that's what would happen to the Shia community in the United States if the president's executive order is allowed to go into effect.
Our guest was previously served as the counsel for the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, the subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Property Rights. She worked for 6 years for Senator Russ Feingold, the chair of the Constitution Subcommittee, which focused on the Patriot Act. Farhana Khera, the president and executive director of Muslim Advocates, on our program. Kathleen from Ohio, Democrats line, thanks for waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. One of the things that your guest just said reminded me of reading Ron Suskind's book, The Price of Loyalty, soon after 9/11, and where he describes, again, the book was The Price of Loyalty, where he describes the Secretary of the Treasury, Paul O'Neill, under Bush 43, that when he started investigating the Saud family's money linked to possibly donations to some of the 9/11 terrorists, that investigation, basically O'Neill was shown the back door by Cheney, because he began to investigate that connection early on, soon after. And then I want to encourage people to read the 9/11 Commission report, and because okay, now I'm not making excuses for any type of violence. Our violence in Syria, supporting, sending arms to rebels in Syria. But can you talk about, in the 9/11 Commission report, they talk about some of the anger towards the U.S. based on our military bases in their country, our support for dictators, and our support for Israel no matter what they do. So again, I hope people don't misinterpret what I'm saying, that I'm making any excuse for violence. But can you talk about some of the reasons that Islamic terrorists, believe that they're,
Gotcha. Caller, we'll let her respond. Thanks.
So I think what the caller was trying to ask is why do particular individuals engage in terrorist acts who happen to be Muslim? And I think the reasons are very multi-pronged and varied, and not only from country to country, but even incident to incident. And I think it's hard to just generalize across the board. In fact, what frankly law enforcement experts say is that it's actually not the case that religion is a driving factor for these people, but what the common thread for these people who engage in these acts of violence is that they're essentially vulnerable people who are looking for a sense of purpose in their life. And that's not just me saying that, but that's people like John Miller, the head of intelligence for the NYPD, and Phil Mudd, a former CIA, FBI official. So people who've been immersed in this have made that very clear. And so I think it's hard to make specific generalizations about it.
Elizabeth, New Jersey, Muslim American. This is Jose. Hello.
Hi. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Welcome.
My comment is that the gentleman who said from Louisiana called for the killing of Muslims is kind of like he's equating himself to ISIS members or Al Qaeda. He's no different than them. If he were a Muslim, he'd probably be a member of ISIS. Also, I just want to say there's a website called it's called lettertobaghdadi.com, where you have 100 leaders and Muslim scholars worldwide writing a letter using Islamic script and evidence refuting their behavior and their actions.
Yeah, I would say not only if that congressman was Muslim would he have been condemned, I think he likely would have been under immediate FBI investigation, if not arrest, for what he posted on Facebook. So I think you're absolutely right. And on your second point, thank you for also raising up the fact that hundreds of religious scholars and imams have condemned the extremist violence. And in fact, in the United States itself, there are a number of American imams who have condemned the activities of groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda, and in fact, at great risk to their own lives. A number of them have actually received specific incredible death threats from ISIS because of their work that they do. It doesn't always get the attention of the news, particularly mainstream news outlets, but there are certainly people who've been very active and vocal on these issues.
This is Patty from Pennsylvania, Republican Line. You're on with our guest. Good morning.
Good morning, Khera and everyone. We're pleased to have you on as a guest, but it's very important to many, many of us that we know that Muslims have been in our country for decades and decades. Many of us are good friends. We actually feel, and our heart breaks for those Muslims who are feeling the results of these terrible ISIS people. But anyway, what I'm talking about is we need their help more than anything. We need the Muslim communities to not just group together and hover there. We need them to actually report and let us know which ones that they suspect if there's a problem. And as far as the president moving this order to ban the countries, it's not a ban of all Muslims. It just gives us a time to extreme vet the ones that need to be in here, that can be in here, and also the ones that are already here. We need their help desperately. So if we can have that 90 days, we can actually stop and take a look and go through the Muslims and the possible ISIS members in the United States a lot better. and then as they come in, being highly vetted during the 90 days or after the 90 days, it'll be much easier for the FBI and security to find out where the problem people are.
Okay, caller, thank you. I appreciate it.
And I thank the caller for her question. She actually raises a couple of issues that I think where there's been unfortunately, a lot of misunderstanding in the public. One of them relates to ISIS, and very specifically, let me make it very clear. ISIS is a death cult. It has nothing to do with Islam or to peace-loving people. In fact, I think these attacks in London just underscore this point. The perpetrators of that attack, if in fact they were inspired by ISIS, and I know the investigation is still underway, but if that's the case, killing innocent people is absolutely antithetical to Islamic teachings. Not only that, they perpetrated these deeds during the holy month of Ramadan, and not only that, they engaged in these acts during the evening when observant Muslims would probably be in the mosque doing their evening prayers and reading the Quran, as observant Muslims who are observing Ramadan do. So I think it's crystal clear more than ever before that the people who attempt to associate themselves with ISIS, I think, have really excommunicated themselves from their religion. So I want to make that absolutely clear. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. And just to put a finer point on this, these people who, and the ISIS folks who purport to use Islam are no different than members of the KKK who have perverted Christianity to support their activities in the past. So this is absolutely analogous activities that are going on there.
Farhana Khera of Muslim Advocates, MuslimAdvocates.org, the website if you want to find out more about the organization. Joining us from San Francisco. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.